primarily in Alaska, but we also like to try to bring in some of our colleagues that work internationally. So it's nice to see Matthias on the line from Avi Potsdam and Marina on the line from Russia. Today, Skip Walker and Jana Pierce are going to give a presentation on a new project that was funded during this last NSF Navigating the New Arctic solicitation. So the focus for those folks not overly familiar with the NNA solicitation, it was kind of an interesting RFP in that they were specifically requesting for proposals and research projects that could kind of bridge the gap between the natural environment and physical processes, biological processes and ecosystems with the built environment as well as with social systems in the Arctic. So kind of a novel solicitation that was put out there with the idea that they were looking for, I'll kind of read it from their website, fundamental convergence research across the social, natural, environmental, and computing and information sciences to address the interactions or connections between natural and built environments and social systems, and how these connections inform our understanding of Arctic change and its local and global effects. So I got involved with Skip and Jana's proposal fairly early on, and I was really excited about their vision because I thought they were definitely tackling each of these components that that was being requested during the solicitation. So the title of their NNA project and presentation today will be Landscape Evolution and Adapting to Change in Ice-Rich Permafrost Systems. So a little background on Skip. He's the director of the Arctic Geobotany Center Lab. Jana is the project coordinator for the lab. Some of their mission statements of the Arctic Geobotany Center include exploring and understanding Arctic geobotanical relationships and dynamics at local to global scales, but also investigating land use changes, conservation issues through interdisciplinary collaboration. So I think they really touch on a lot of key aspects of how the Arctic is changing rapidly, and I think they'll give a great overview presentation today on their new NNA project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Skip first. I think he'll present a few slides overviewing the project, and then Jana will talk more about the project coordination and the outreach campaign.
Sorry, we just lost our share screen button.
It should be back.
We can hear you okay.
Yeah. I'm looking around for the controls here. Apologies.
I wonder if I force share it to you. Is there a way, Meredith, to do it on your end?
I can, but I know that they've got it there. So you might.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just that the window went behind the other window, and I think we're just about there.
Okay, good. We can see we got the
That
You can see everything? Okay.
Yeah, and it looks like you're correct. Yep, you're in slideshow as well. So go for it.
All right, so I guess we're ready to go. Okay, I'm Skip Walker, and I'm the director of a small group here at UAF called the Arctic Alaska Geobotany Center. And I'll go ahead and ask Jana to introduce herself.
So yes, Jana Pierce. I've been working with Skip since 2014 in a variety of support roles, and for this project, I was able to kind of use my other background, which has been involved in the private sector consulting in working with a lot of communities around Alaska on different social and economic issues, and so this was a good opportunity to work with communities or start to work with a community on issues that are critical to them that are related to science.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and begin the talk. The project that we're involved with is, as Ben was talking about, part of this new NSF initiative called Navigating the New Arctic. And our project is really focused on ground ice. So this talk will be pretty much about ground ice, both the how ground ice gets into landscapes and the sort of evolutionary processes that are involved with making pattern ground and many of the problems that are associated with that. And then the other half is adapting to change. And so I'm going to talk mostly about this portion on the left, landscape evolution, and some of the changes that we're seeing, and mostly about Prudhoe Bay, where I've worked for many years. And Jana will focus more on the adapting to change side and what we're doing along the lines of coordinating, collaborating, and co-developing the project with the community of Point Lay. So I'm going to use the buttons here. Here we go. This diagram on the right is this NNA framework, which shows the interactions between the built, social, and natural environments. And it's the intersection of all these that is really the focus of what we're doing, and I think the whole concept around navigating the new Arctic. I'll first present a little bit on ice-rich permafrost, and most of you don't need an introduction to that. So the majority of what I'll talk about is a hierarchical approach to examining change in these environments. So this is at the plot level, landscape level, regional level, and then later on, Janet will say something about some of the circumpolar collaboration going through Artic and this new initiative called T-Mosaic. So ice-rich permafrost, as you all know, is a large part of the Arctic. About 50% of the Arctic has ice-rich permafrost, which is permafrost with excess ice that exceeds the pore space in the soils. And of course, many of the landforms and sort of things like coastal erosion are related to the presence of ice-rich permafrost. We actually see this ground ice as the keystone property of all of these systems that are really dominant in much of the Arctic. And it kind of evolves out of this Keystone Species idea that is a big part of ecology that was developed by Payne in 1969. And the idea is if you change ground ice or you eliminate ground ice, it acts like a keystone species. Most of the system is somehow related to that and will change. So this is sort of a central idea that is central to our project. Another central idea is this hierarchical approach, which we've used in vegetation science, and I think will apply very well to the interactions between the vegetation and ground ice. And it's very simple, but it involves looking at communities at more or less the plant level or plot level, and then how are these organized in landscapes, and then at the regional level, and then how do we view this at the circumpolar level? And you need different tools to do all these sorts of different approaches. So I'm going to talk first about the plot level and some of the research we're doing at Prudhoe Bay, and then how this is manifesting at the landscape level and at the regional level. Within Artic, we've sort of developed an approach to how do you start looking at infrastructure, because infrastructure is organized in different ways, and different parts of the Arctic have different sorts of ways in which infrastructure is laid out. And one example is the node network sort of situation we have at Prudhoe Bay. Corridors, which the Dalton Highway and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline are a great example. And then you have villages. And you need different approaches to look at each of these sorts of situations. At the plot level, we're looking at utilizing a lot of the plot level information from Arctic observatories. And there's several of these around northern Alaska. The primary set of observatories that we're focusing on is that of Vlad Romanovsky's permafrost observatories. And this is just some example that's very relevant to the work that we're doing at Prudhoe Bay, is his borehole data from Dead Horse. And what we're seeing is a big change over time. Vlad, of course, is most interested in the purple line here, the change in the permafrost temperatures, which are at about 20 meters, if I'm right. I'm not sure that's right, but and we see that much of the variation that we see in the other records is buffered, but it shows a very strong upward trend of about almost 4 degrees over 39 years. And Vlad can probably correct me as far as the details of that, but he's also measuring at the same sites the air temperature, the active layer thickness, and then we can get kind of a longer record from the stations at Dead Horse and the airport at ARCUS to get the top line, which is the summer warmth index, and that's a record of just the mean, some of the mean temperatures, monthly mean temperatures above zero. This is most relevant for plant growth, but it also seems to be the record that's most relevant to the bottom line, which is the active layer thickness, which is probably most relevant to what we're seeing as far as the melting of the tops of these ice wedges, which is a big deal now at Prudhoe Bay. Here we see a time series of the change along one of the roads. This is the Spine Road, which is the main road through the Prudhoe Bay area. We see from 1968, which was the first year of oil field discovery, when they started taking these annual pictures of the whole oil field with aerial photography. And I'm just showing a sort of a selective set here, but you can see how much the extent of ice wedge degradation and formation of thermokarst has changed, not only near the road, but also at distances away from the road. The yellow line is about 200 meters on each side of the road, and it's a part of this monitoring that we're doing. I won't go into the details of this, but we've set up transects, and a lot of what we're looking at is details of the permafrost. You see Misha Konevsky in the upper right-hand corner with one of his cores and describing it. We're also describing the soils and the snow and the vegetation and water depths and dust effects. And of course, the topography is a big part of what we're looking at. And so we've got 5 of these transects across the various parts of, at 2 main sites, one near Colleen Lake and the other is at the airport. So the ground ice characterization is part of Misha Konevsky's and Yuri's big effort that they've been doing for many years in collaboration with Tor Jorgensen. And they've developed various scenarios of ice-rich permafrost change that is now being extended to what's the permafrost doing near roads and infrastructure, and how is that different from what we see out in further away from the roads in the natural sort of environment. And our project will really focus on the differences between what's going on near infrastructure and then what do we see in analogous natural systems in basically drained lake basins of different ages. So we'll be tying in with Ben's Drain Lake project that is mostly focused to the west, but I think we can do an extension of that to Prudhoe Bay, because the lakes are different here. They have different characteristics, and they also have different substrates than we see much further west. At the landscape level, we're looking at mainly 3 areas that are some of the most well-developed portions of the Prudhoe Bay oil field. And these we started monitoring back in the 1980s. There was a fish and wildlife project that we were part of that was really focused on shorebirds. And, but that became a project that was extended when the National Research Council did a cumulative impact study at Prudhoe Bay. And so these 2 photos, the first one is from 1949, which shows the area before there was any oil field. And then 2010, we see these 3 areas. Though A is an area near the BP base camp. B is the little dot. I don't know if I can, do you see my cursor? Probably not.
We do.
In the middle there is the beginning of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline at Pump Station 1. This is also the area that the IBP, the biome, started working on in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So there's a long heritage of scientific research from this area. The area on the C is the ARCO, what was the ARCO base camp in their airstrip, and also a heavily developed area that has changed a lot over the period of time. So what we're doing is building on this sort of legacy data sets that started in 1949 with the naval aerial photographs of the whole of the North Slope at very fine scale, wonderful photography, and black and white, but pretty much covers the whole North Slope at fine scale. And I think both Matt Sturm and Ben, you've taken advantage of this, haven't you, Ben? Also,
Definitely.
And then we also, at the same time in the 1970s, put together a series of publications. This is the Geobotanical Atlas, which described the soils, landforms, permafrost, and vegetation of the region. And so we can go back to these maps and look at how the area has changed over a long period of time. And that became the basis then for this historical change analysis that was part of a paper by Martha Reynolds et al. In Global Change Biology in 2014. And this is just kind of an overview of the process, what we call the integrated geoecological and historical change mapping approach, where we derive on one map all the information that is contained in the whole time series of natural changes to the landscape and changes related to infrastructure. And with that, then, this is a simple map, but it shows the comparison of those 3 map areas, both the direct impacts, which are those that are basically the footprint of any of the infrastructure, which includes the roads, the gravel pads, gravel mines, and other approaches. And you can see that most of this impact, at least within the eastern part of the developed area, leveled off after about 1989 and has remained rather constant. The right-hand portion here shows what's been going on with the indirect impacts, and these are the changes associated with such things as roadside flooding, dust, thermokarst, and just debris and other things that you may find adjacent to infrastructure. And that hasn't leveled off. We see at all 3 areas it has continued to climb, and the indirect impacts at area C have climbed the most, mainly due to thermokarst. And the differences that we're seeing in A, B, and C are really related to different types of landscapes. Area A is a very wet, thaw lake dominated portion of the oil field. Area C is a relatively well-drained area that has lots of residual surfaces that have high ice content. And the blue area, the light blue area, is the thermokarst. That's been going up, whereas the flooding has kind of declined in that area. So I guess the message here is that the indirect impacts overall now exceed the area of the direct impacts. And this is really not all of the indirect impacts. Many of the indirect impacts we can't see, like off-road vehicle trails, the changes to the natural vegetation that are occurring because of widespread dust, things like that are not mappable. And, but they may be detectable using various different remote sensing approaches. So that's something to think about. This is the regional scale. So this looks at all of the oil fields on the North Slope, everything from the Canning River over to the Colville River, and all of the linear infrastructure, the footprints and things like that. I'm not going to go into the detail, but at this scale, you can see the same sort of, in the lower right-hand corner, the footprint of all this infrastructure. And the dark brown is the gravel mines, which are surprisingly one of the biggest impacts. The next is the gravel pads. The light yellow are the roads. And then other sorts of infrastructure are the gray. So overall, this overall sort of leveled off in the 1989s, and then recently, as the oil field has been expanding to the west, we see another upward trend in the footprint of the infrastructure. So I'm going to close here, and Jan is going to take over, but I want to leave it with just the organization of our project. I haven't said anything about hydrology or, you know, not a lot about permafrost or vegetation, but these are the major sort of biophysical components to our project that will be looking at landscape evolution. Adaptation to change is these other four components that is looking at village housing, infrastructure, social dynamics, and then the roads, mainly along the Dalton Highway and at Prudhoe Bay. And so we all have several hats. We're involved in different parts of this. And there's also these cross-component activities related to data management, modeling, remote sensing, which Ben is leading, and education, co-development. So I'll let Jana take over. She'll be focusing on the collaboration and co-development portion of the project.
Thanks, Skip. So as Ben talked about, the NNA call, NSF call for navigating the new Arctic, asked people to put together projects that really had a strong co-development and convergence elements. And we did not do a 2-year planning grant, which I know NSF has found very useful for teams to actually really work on the front end and putting a proposal together with a local community or other partners. And so we put together a management plan that we hoped would help us develop our co-development plan in the early stages of the project with our partners, which include the community of Point Lay and the TNHA Regional Housing Authority, as well as the North Slope Borough Community Development Department. So this was our first meeting with some of our partners, and we took advantage of the fact that the Alaska Federation of Natives conference in October was in Fairbanks this year, and so we had members of the Point Lake community that were in town for that conference come and meet with us at the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, and just to have a conversation about what was important to them and what they were interested in learning from our project. And you know, some of the things that we heard in their own words, which were not surprising, but good to hear in their own words, was just the perception in Point Lay that everyone has noticed the ground is falling. And that quote is from Pearl McCock, who was our first village liaison. And she said that when she first moved to Point Lay 20 years ago, the ground was flat, and now there are real deep holes all over. And there's actually concerns about you know, just the hazards created by this landscape that's pockmarked with large holes, both in terms of children playing, of driving, of doing subsistence activities. James Henry, who is a member of our steering committee, really gave a very sort of typical description of how it affects residents. And he said, the house I'm in now and most of the houses here are on pilings. With the ground shifting and changing, it's dropped quite a bit. The pilings are showing more and more, and I can feel my house shake a little bit when my kids are running around. And so the tilting and shaking of the houses, it seems to be one of the most critical issues in the community right now, as well as the failures in the water and piped sewer system. So the reason, though, that we chose Point Lay in the first place is because they are the community on the North Slope that probably has the most damage due to ground ice thaw. And TNHA, the Regional Housing Authority, went to the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and asked for help in figuring out better solutions for their housing foundations. We partnered with Cold Climate Housing Research Center on this proposal as a way of addressing the built environment component. So we knew that we wanted to really take a deep dive and understand the physical environment processes and how the vegetation and hydrology and permafrost are interrelated and interact, but to address the built environment component and the social component. We partner with Cold Climate Housing Research Center, which has been working with communities across the state to address some of the climate-related housing situations and doing some really innovative work. So their task, or what they decided, how they decided they wanted to help TNHA, is to look at some of the solutions that have already put in place and then evaluate what has worked and what hasn't, and then work with the other engineers on our project from the Institute of Northern Engineering, Yuri Scher and Misha Konevsky and Billy Connor, as well as with the residents and the Housing Authority, to see if we can come up with some best practices or better ideas to do in this quickly evolving landscape. And then for both aspects of the project, both in terms of the housing and just understanding what's going on with the permafrost in Point Lay, and we'd like to involve students at the Kali School. So our approach to managing and co-development is to work with village partners and regional partners. And so the partners on our project are the tribe, the native village of Point Lay. And we have a village liaison that the tribal council has selected, and that's Lupita Henry. And then also a steering committee made up of 3 or 4 members of the community that really will help guide our interactions with the community and figure out the best way to work with the community and what their interests are. And that was a suggestion from Gary Kofinas, who's worked with a lot of different communities on research projects. And then the principal at Kali School and eventually the science teacher. Cully Corporation is the village corporation, so we're working with Marty A. Wallen, who's the CEO. And then our regional partners are the Griffin Hagel, the executive director of the Housing Authority, the North Slope Borough, primarily Public Works, CIPM, and the Department of Planning and Community Services. And then also keeping in the loop ICAS, the Inupiat community of the Arctic Slope. So one of the things that's changed, though, since we developed this proposal and found out that we were funded, is that there's many other projects that are also focused on Point Lay because of the critical urgency of its issues. And so in addition to our project, which is in the second box there, there's a project that 2 of our team members are also on. Vlad Romanovsky and Dmitry Nikolsky are also on an NNA Track 1 project looking at resilience and adaptation to the effects of permafrost degradation induced coastal erosion, or PIPER. And that project is working in four communities on the North Slope, one of which is Point Lay. And we just came off of a teleconference with them. They've had their initial visits to Utqiagvik and Wainwright. and really heard from everybody that Point Lay is the most urgent and in need of solutions. And then also Ben Jones, who's on our team, has a project that's in its second year, the Drain Thaw Lake Basin Project. And so they're also looking at Point Lay as well as other communities on the coastal plain. And then a very new project is a Denali Commission funded project, which is the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys working with the North Slope Borough on some drone studies over Point Lay. So we came to the realization that we can't all, it would not be good for the community, and we wouldn't get the most out of our research if we all operated independently. So we're coordinating to the extent that we can among the 4 projects, sharing data, sharing research plans, and then just sharing what we learn as we go, and figuring out where one project can take the lead, and we're not duplicating efforts, and we're trying to minimize our footprint or the disturbance to the community from our studies. And then in terms of going to the circumpolar scale, we are continuing to work with the Artic project, which is Rapid Arctic Transitions Due to Infrastructure and Climate Initiative, that was started in Toyama in 2015. And so that's a project that Skip's been intimately involved in, and we've done a couple of international workshops that are really focused on the infrastructure issues related to climate, in many countries. And so there was a white paper that came out a couple of years ago, and then we have plans for some new publications working with that group, and perhaps another workshop in Lisbon in 2021. And then that group has decided to sort of reform itself or morph into an action group as part of the T-Mosaic project. And so for the next couple of years at least, the Arctic initiative will kind of be folded into the T-Mosaic project, and also looking at how infrastructure is related or linked to some of the observations that are coming from the sea ice and coastal observations of the Mosaic project. And then in terms of education, as I said, in Point Lay, we will be working with the principal and the teachers at the Colley School to figure out the best ways to involve students in our research, both on the housing side and in understanding the permafrost dynamics. We've been leading, the Alaska Geobotany Center has been leading a field course, a summer field course for 3 weeks in June for I don't know, about 5 of the last 7 years. And so we're going to do that again in June. And we've hired a new graduate student, also a postdoc. Helena's on the call today. And then we'll be recruiting 2 undergraduates per year to work on this project with us. We've already recruited one of those. And so some of those students will be among the students that go on this summer's 3-week field course, which really looks at the ecology of the Dalton Highway corridor, including permafrost, vegetation, and other components. And then, as I said, we have been recruiting undergraduate research students, and we have one student who is putting in an application to look at some of the microbial activity at the same sites that we'll be looking at as part of our ground ice studies. And Skip, maybe you want to talk about this last slide.
Well, how I organized this was a project at the University of Virginia, and I was invited to this last fall, and it was a terrific workshop and really impressed me as something that we'd like to incorporate in our project, is to develop these rather creative ways to communicate permafrost science through visual arts, music, dance, architecture. And I don't want to say anything more except that I would like to see this become more NNA sponsored this workshop, and I'm hoping that it becomes more widespread among the other projects and finding these ways to communicate. Particularly, so I think videos with the villagers. What we're trying to do is involve the students, and a lot of them are really good artists and are looking at videos and looking at you know, sculptures and other ways. And one of the arts at this workshop in Virginia was a portrayal of polygonal ground in really creative ways that filled a whole room with art. So I don't know how we may want to say more about that. I think we're going to stop there, though, with our presentation.
Yeah, we'll give the screen back over to you, Meredith.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Thank you, Skip and Jenna. Great presentation. Did you want to say anything about this, Howie, before we jump into some questions for Skip and Jenna?
I'll just a few words. I think only that I thought it was extremely successful, and that was, it was way beyond sort of my expectations. My initial thought was that it was going to feel kind of like a clunky conference where we do a little bit of science, then have a music performance, hear some more science, go to an art exhibit. But it turned out that it wasn't that way at all, because the scientists were really engaged in the music and the art, and the artists and musicians and architects were super engaged in the science. So it was really, I think, you know, the expectation that the different disciplines wouldn't be interested in each other was just absolutely wrong. It felt like it flowed really, really well, and it just showed the interest across disciplines. And we're following up a little bit. The conference was successful. It got a lot of attention internally, and we received an internal award to do more with regard to music and science and architecture that we're starting up in Utgagvik. And then we built on it for our NNA proposal, which we just submitted a couple of weeks ago.
I think the thing that may have impressed me the most was the engagement of the students. You had that group.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I think they drove the workshop in a way.
Yeah, they did.
Of their small, you know, of their interest, and, you know, coming at it from the village perspective in many cases as to what they're seeing. And
yeah,
that to me was great.
So we had eight young adults in the Arctic or Alaska Youth Ambassadors program participate, and they weren't all students, and they weren't all Indigenous, but they were all. So I think 5 out of the 8 were Indigenous, and the other 3 just had grown up in Alaska, and they were either. I think the youngest maybe was 17, and the oldest was 25. So they were different young adult stages, and we really they were a central part of the conference. So in our first day, which was a symposium, we alternated talks between practitioners and the Alaska youth. And then all the panels that we had were 2 practitioners, panel discussions, 2 practitioners and 2 Alaska youth. So they were really embedded, and they were really honest and frank with us in terms of how scientists work in their community and how they felt about it and what's going on in their community. So that was an amazing part of the conference. All right.
Excellent. Thanks, Howie. Yeah, thanks, Howie. Thanks, Skip. So we have about 10, 12 minutes left on the call today. So maybe let's try to split that down the middle, maybe 5, 6 minutes for questions for Jenna or Skip, and then we'll wrap up with some member updates among the PCT team. So yeah, Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a planning grant. I don't have luxury of a big grant. And I'm trying to navigate how these communities are going to interact with us, because they've already done a lot of planning and so on. But I'm also concerned about, how do you take, since you're already in a phase 1, how are you going to take this, what your outcomes are, to the state and federal level where it's going to make a difference? Because one of the things I've been concerned about is we're creating projects, but ultimately we're also identifying what needs to be state and federal funding to help these villages. So to what extent have you, given that you've got a large grant, are planning and how you're going to take this to the state and federal level to really address some of the problems? Because obviously a $3 million grant is not going to address these problems. So can you give me some insight on that?
Yeah, so I think we're still figuring that out, not surprisingly. And one of our goals in talking with our partners at Cold Climate Housing Research, and also the call that we just had with Ming Zhao's project from Penn State, is to focus on collecting the data, the hard data that is going to be needed to be collected in order to make better plans, and that can be used as the basis for that we know people will need when they go to a federal agency, which is, or to the Denali Commission, also federal money, but to get grants that will help them with construction or relocation or whatever the solutions are. So they're going to need hard data. One of the services that we can provide is making sure that we're cognizant of that when we're in the communities, and we can help them collect the data that they're going to need, as well as the data that we need to help understand maybe what are the better solutions. Maybe there are no best solutions, or maybe to hard data that will help us reject certain solutions, so that if they're throwing, if the federal government or the borough or the state is ready to spend money, that we're spending it on something that is more likely to be successful than not. So
I think another thing here is the involvement of engineers who are going to come up with these solutions. They already have a lot of solutions, and they're out there that could be applied. And the cold climate housing has a lot of solutions that they've used in other villages. So we're going to try, I think a lot of it will be consolidating the information that is already out there. And then, as Vlad pointed out this morning in our other talk, was that there's a lot of questions that we just don't know why the phenomena that we're seeing are occurring. Basic scientific reasons for the sorts of heave that we're seeing in the villages and the sort of collapse that we're seeing are apparently not within the existing models. And so part of it will be to develop the models that actually explain, and then using the models, I think we can probably come up with better solutions than exist right now. And we don't have the answers for what Point Lay is specifically going to do, but we're hoping by the end of the project, we'll have a much better feel for it. Yeah. And I think we have an engineering group from Canada that's coming over that will be working with the scientists such as Vlad and Dimitri and other people who are working most closely with Point Lay. And they already have a lot of experience in this particular village. So anyway, so there are ways we're going to try to get, how that filters down to policy, I'm not sure.
That's exactly what Julie asking, how all this knowledge will get up and who will be using it. Yeah.
I think that this is a really important thing for all of the NNA projects to come together to help develop policy. And I really think NSF, science is one thing, but obviously because you've involved people in this project, NNA, it's got to be policy driven. And somehow this really does need to communicate to that. And if it doesn't, because your project will finish in what, 3 to 5 years, then what? What then happens in these villages? And this is when we have the meeting at NSF for the NNA, I really want to push on this, because what happens after the funding runs out? This is what we need to think about. And I really would like just to think now so that there is a continuum out there in the future for what we're going to plan for helping these villages.
I don't think you're alone in this, Julie.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's not, you know, because we live in Alaska where we have state legislatures that don't listen to us, you know, and but how do you talk to them? How do you get the message out there? And we're doing it somehow through through hook and by crook, through messages, through the letters to edit. I don't know, you know, how do we do it? Maybe there's some great answers already out there, but you know, I don't see it right now.
So the other thing that we're doing is just, you know, we formed an advisory committee with members of the North Slope Borough and with the tribal president and the village corporation. And so we're also going to be guided by them in terms of what are they interested in doing. And as the project goes along, figuring out how we can help them with the goals that they defined, and whether that's, but that's not necessarily at the national policy level. So I think you're right. If we can, with all of these NNA projects going on, if we can start that conversation with other national policy and make sure that they're involved in this kind of journey along with everybody step by step, instead of being handed, you know, 5 years from now, this is what we want, they may be more engaged to be part of the conversation.
I think whole climate housing has been pretty successful in this.
Yeah.
Engaging the state and the feds.
Because exactly this called housing, they have something to offer, because they specifically, you know, trying to solve problems, they have something to offer. And that's where hopefully we will be at the end of the projects. We will have something to offer, not just you know, saying O and R, but saying why it's happening and what possibly can be done.
Yeah.
And you can really approach and go up. Of course, it doesn't mean that it will be successful, but at least we'll have very, very solid things to put on the table. That's very important.
I want to mention one other thing, and that's the work that Billy and Misha and Yuri have been working on. They're actually working on how to build roads, and so they're developing guidelines for the Department of Transportation, and part of our project is contributing to that effort. And I think that's, you know, an approach that is a solution, you know.
Concrete guidance.
Concrete guidance. And I think that's what we're doing in the village also. We're coming up with concrete guidance for how to build foundations.
Cold Climate Housing Research just got, as of last week, a new grant from the Department of Energy called New Igloo, and they're going to be looking at developing modular homes that can be, you know, include water and sewer and can be moved. And so this is the beginning of a project that will offer another possible solution.
Yeah, great.
And maybe you can say something about your work with the water source there.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the drinking water source lake in Point Lay drained in the fall of 2016. It overtopped its bank, eroded an ice wedge network, and then emptied out into the river there. And so they've essentially been searching for a freshwater source ever since. They tried the river kind of unsuccessfully because of all the sediment and turbidity in the river. They tried to drill a couple wells in the community, but I think they encountered some brines and some brackish water down at depth. So one of our interests is trying to help find a new freshwater drinking source lake by combining some remote sensing data and some field observational data. So we have 1 minute left today. Thanks, Julie, for bringing up the bringing up that important point. It is definitely a really critical aspect of these NNA projects, and hoping that they all kind of converge in the end on some common solutions. So maybe the last minute today, can I call out on you, Vladimir, for a brief update relative to the ICOP conference in China that was planned for this upcoming June?
Well, that was already officially decided that this will not happen in June. It seems like they're thinking about possibilities to move it to the later dates. There's no yet information on that, but it will not happen in June this year. That's what we know for sure. Okay. Unfortunately, but hopefully it will not just, we will not skip this conference. It will happen, but probably at the later dates.
Okay, yeah, that's unfortunate, but yeah, thank you for the update, Vladimir. Yes, I think we'll call that good, Meredith. That's bottom of the hour. Great presentation, Skip. Great presentation, Jana. Thank you for the overview of your project.
Yes, thank you. And this will be recorded and notes will be posted, and we'll be following up with any action items that are needed. So thanks, everyone.
Great. Yeah, thanks for everybody joining, and particularly those folks in Germany, Julie and Matthias. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you in March.
Bye.